on ICE detention centers. And first I'm going to talk a little bit about a specific detention center that's in Dilley, Texas. Lawyers that go to it, they call it baby jail. It is a place where women and children are held. Men, when they're crossing the border, they're split from their families, and men and boys over 18 are taken into separate facilities. And so Dilley is one exclusively for women and children. When you walk in, there's a room called the hielera, it's called the fridge, and people are always sick. There's very limited health care. There's not enough doctors, there's not enough nurses, and there isn't enough medication for the people that do get seen. So women are often just seen holding their sick children. And the average stay is about 3 weeks. If you're there for 4 to 5 weeks, you usually get transferred to Burke Detention Center, which is in Pennsylvania. And people will stay there for months, sometimes years. There's children who are in there right now that have had at least 2 birthdays in there. There was recently a lawsuit that went through to challenge child detentions, and the outcome was that it's illegal to hold children for over 21 days. So you can legally hold a child up for 3 weeks, but obviously this is violated all the time. Sometimes they say it's so that parents and children can stay together, so if the mom is staying longer, they'll say that that's why the child is staying, but really it should be the other way around, that both of them get released at the same time. There's also a big issue where people who get their paperwork that goes through, sometimes they're still not released. So lawyers will go through all of the documents and they'll see that this person should have been released, but for some reason they're still in the detention center, and so they'll have to go through another legal process of trying to get them out and figuring out how they fell through the cracks and why they fell through the cracks. There's really no justification for detaining a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old. There's no justification for detaining any of these people. There aren't individual findings for anyone in Dilley and why they should be there. The only reason they're there is purely because they crossed the border without documentation and were caught. Most of these people who are crossing the border are crossing to try and get asylum. They're fleeing poverty and violence, often in South America, and we know that this poverty and violence is caused by the U.S. Asylum cases are very strange because they require you to be physically in the U.S., but you can't have documents already. So there is no other way other than to come and cross without papers. If someone does get a visa, which can take years and years and is a very difficult process, if you do get a visa and you come and once you're inside you try to apply for asylum, you can be charged with visa fraud. You also, if that doesn't happen, the criteria for getting a visa and how you were approved, that's going to be grounds for your asylum case not to be approved. So the system is really rigged on every single level. And detention centers are a horrifically perfect place for labor super exploitation. The women that live at Dilley, they aren't working, but CoreCivic, which is the corporation that runs for-profit prisons and detention centers, they get paid by how many beds they have. So Dilley has 2,400 beds. Right now there's only 500 people in there, which is good compared to how many there could be in there, but CoreCivic still gets paid on the number of beds, not based on how many people are there. So really it's just an incentive for them to keep building and building more prisons and detention centers regardless of how many people are in them. Last fall there was a proposal for 4 to 5 more detention centers to be built. One of them actually very near where I grew up. And often these detention centers and prisons as well will appeal to communities, saying that they will bring jobs if they're allowed to build their detention centers there. But really all they do is bring fear for immigrant communities and push confidence for white supremacists in the area. In most other detention centers, ones that are predominantly men, prisoners are forced to work. There's one in Aurora, Colorado, a detention center where prisoners were forced to clean, maintain, and operate a 1,500-bed facility. And GEO, which is an organization like CoreCivic, pays them $1 a day or nothing, calling it volunteer work. If they don't do this volunteer work, they're threatened with being put in solitary confinement or with being put in physical restraints. So it's really not volunteer work in any way. There's another detention center in Georgia where detainees are held in unsanitary, inhumane, and isolated conditions even when they are working. And they're forced to work full-time for $1 to $3 a day. Food is also scarce, so often workers will choose to work in the kitchen because it means that they have better access to food. And the ICE vendor contracts repeatedly cite voluntary work, but there's no way that the prisoners can really say that they're not going to do this if they want to be fed or not be in solitary confinement, and really if they want to survive. The U.S. and its capitalist economy is at a dead end. One of the ways it manages to stay afloat is by expanding the number of super exploited workers that it has access to. So by building more prisons and more detention centers where workers, primarily people of color, are super exploited behind closed doors, or rather behind barbed wire. Detainees are fighting back. There's one example in the Northwest Detention Center, it's in Tacoma, Washington, where prisoners held 7 hunger strikes last year in 2017. At one point, it's pretty amazing. At one point, there were 750 prisoners that were all striking at the same time. There are so many stories to tell of families that are reunited, of prisoner solidarity, but also of guard brutality, of laws dictating that lawyers and other people coming into detention centers can't touch or hold crying babies or hug mothers, of starvation and of overwork, of exploitation. But the prisoners are fighting, and so are we, and they're not waiting for the legal system to make it easier for them. They're taking it into their own hands. Because prisons and detention centers are really two sides of the same coin, I want to end with the chant of La migra, la policía, la misma porquería. So if we can all do it together. La migra, la policía, la misma porquería. La migra, la policía, la misma porquería. Thank you.